Cattle Baron stormed church yelling, "She's mine," then snatched the bride on horseback. Birds chirped softly from the tall trees lining the main road, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh hay from the surrounding fields. It was a perfect day, calm and warm, one of those rare mornings that seemed almost magical. On this particular day, the town was alive with excitement, unlike any other. From the very first light, people had been bustling about, preparing for an event that everyone had been anticipating for months. Today was the wedding day of Clara Hartley, the young woman everyone admired for her kindness, intelligence, and beauty. Clara had grown up in Cedar Creek, the daughter of a respected farmer and a woman known for her grace. She had always been gentle with animals and people alike, earning the love of her neighbors and friends. Everyone in the town knew her smile, and when she laughed, it seemed to make the sun shine even brighter. Clara was to marry Thomas Miller, a humble and hard-working rancher who had won her heart over the years with his steady honesty, his gentle patience, and the quiet strength with which he faced life's challenges. The couple had known each other since childhood. Their friendship had grown slowly, quietly, and then, inevitably, blossomed into love. The entire town had gathered in the small, whitewashed church that sat at the center of Cedar Creek. Its wooden steeple reached toward the sky, and the stained glass windows reflected the sunlight in warm colors that danced on the pews. Inside, the air smelled faintly of flowers and wax from the candles, mixed with the soft scent of old wood. Families and friends filled the seats, their voices buzzing with soft chatter and laughter, all waiting for the ceremony to begin. The children ran around nervously, trying to catch glimpses of the bride and groom, while the older townsfolk settled into their pews, proud to witness what they believed was a perfect union. Clara had been preparing for this day for weeks, with the help of her mother and closest friends. Her dress was simple yet elegant, made of soft white fabric that glimmered in the morning light. It flowed gently to the floor, and delicate lace traced the edges, adding a touch of grace to her appearance. Her hair was styled in soft waves, pinned carefully to frame her face, and a small bouquet of wildflowers rested in her hands. She felt a mix of excitement and nervousness, her heart fluttering as she glanced at the entrance of the church, waiting for the moment she would walk down the aisle. Her mother's gentle hand rested on her shoulder, offering comfort and quiet encouragement. Thomas stood at the altar, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. His boots were polished, his shirt crisp and neat, and his eyes reflected a mixture of pride, nervousness, and sheer joy. He had waited for this day for as long as he could remember, and seeing Clara now, standing so close to becoming his wife, made his heart swell with happiness. His friends, who had grown up with him on the ranch, stood nearby, offering smiles and quiet words of encouragement. The entire congregation turned their attention toward the aisle, where everyone knew Clara would soon appear. As the church doors opened, a hush fell over the crowd. The sunlight poured in behind Clara, illuminating her figure like a gentle halo. She walked slowly, each step measured and graceful, her eyes fixed on Thomas. The townsfolk watched in admiration, feeling the significance of the moment settle over them. It was more than just a wedding. It was a celebration of love, trust, and the hope of a bright future. People whispered among themselves, sharing memories of Clara's childhood, the times Thomas had helped neighbors with their cattle, and the story of how the two of them had met so many years ago. The stories brought smiles to faces young and old, and for a moment, everyone felt connected through the shared history of their town. Despite the joyous atmosphere, a few whispers of concern drifted quietly through the crowd. Some older townsfolk remembered Roderick Kane, the cattle baron from a neighboring county. Roderick was known far and wide for his temper, his wealth, and his ruthless ways. He had once been enamored with Clara, pursuing her with a persistence that bordered on obsession. Though she had always been polite and courteous, she had never returned his affections. Over time, his pursuit had become a source of tension in the region, and most people in Cedar Creek had come to view him with caution. Today, however, no one expected him to interfere. They hoped the past would remain in the shadows, and that Clara and Thomas could finally enjoy the happiness they deserved. Inside the church, Clara's heart beat faster as she approached the altar. She felt a mix of excitement and anxiety, but the warmth in Thomas's eyes calmed her nerves. He extended his hand, which she took, feeling the familiar comfort of his touch. The priest smiled warmly at them, preparing to begin the ceremony, while the congregation leaned forward in anticipation. Clara and Thomas exchanged quiet words, promises whispered under their breath, expressing love and devotion that had been growing for years. It was a moment filled with intimacy and sincerity, despite the presence of so many witnesses. As the ceremony began, the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows painted colorful patterns across the wooden floor. The voices of the townsfolk rose in soft harmonies as they sang blessings and prayers for the couple. Clara and Thomas held hands, their fingers intertwined, and for a few blissful minutes, it seemed as though nothing could disturb the peace of this perfect day. Every smile, every glance, every small gesture carried the weight of shared history, unspoken understanding, and the hope of a future built together. Yet, even in this serene moment, an undercurrent of tension lingered, unnoticed by most. The memory of Roderick Kane's intensity lingered like a shadow at the edge of everyone's minds. No one could say for certain whether the past would remain distant, or whether it would reach out to shatter the calm of the morning. And so, as Clara and Thomas shared their vows, their hearts full of hope, the quiet town of Cedar Creek held its collective breath, unaware that the day's perfect beginning might soon be disrupted by an unexpected and dramatic force. Every detail of the wedding, the flowers, the music, the smiling faces, the whispered stories of the past, added to the sense of significance. Clara's eyes shone with tears of happiness, reflecting the sunlight and the love she felt in that moment. Thomas's grip on her hand was steady and reassuring, a silent promise that he would protect and cherish her for the rest of their lives. The townsfolk felt the same emotions, a mixture of joy, nostalgia, and anticipation for the life that lay ahead for the young couple. For them, this wedding was a symbol of hope, love, and the enduring strength of human connection. Little did anyone know that the serene morning, the laughter, and the shared joy were merely the calm before a storm. The story of that day was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would test the courage, loyalty, and love of everyone involved. But in this moment, as Clara and Thomas stood hand in hand, surrounded by friends and family, the world seemed perfect. And in that fleeting perfection, the town of Cedar Creek could only marvel at the beauty of love, unaware that the tranquility was about to be shattered in a way no one could have imagined. The calm, golden morning of Clara and Thomas's wedding was shattered without warning. Just as the priest raised his hands to begin the blessing, a distant cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, growing larger and darker with each passing second. Birds scattered from the trees, their startled cries echoing across the quiet town, and the chatter of the townsfolk turned into murmurs of curiosity and concern. People squinted against the sunlight, trying to make sense of the approaching storm of dust. At first, some thought it was just a group of riders passing by, perhaps workers returning from the nearby ranches. But soon, it became clear that this was no ordinary arrival. It was something far more urgent, something no one expected. From the dust emerged a tall figure on horseback, moving with a purposeful and threatening speed. The man wore a dark, wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, and his long coat flared behind him as the wind caught it. His horse's hooves pounded the dry earth with a rhythmic intensity, each strike sending tremors through the wooden planks of the church doors. The townsfolk froze in place, a sense of unease rippling through the crowd. Mothers clutched their children closer, and men shifted uneasily, trying to prepare themselves for whatever was coming. Whispers spread quickly. It was Roderick Kane, the notorious cattle baron. Everyone knew of his wealth, his power, and his dangerous temper. Few dared to confront him, and many had chosen to simply stay out of his way. Roderick's eyes were fixed on the church, burning with a determination that made even the bravest men in the crowd take a step back. He had not come to pass through the town casually. He had come with a purpose, and that purpose was unmistakably clear to anyone who could read the look in his eyes. As he approached the church doors, the townspeople began to murmur in fear. "He's come for her," one man whispered, his voice trembling. "Roderick Kane doesn't come into town without a reason," another added, shaking his head. The air grew tense, as if the entire town were holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. With a sudden burst of speed, Roderick spurred his horse forward, kicking up a cloud of dust and gravel that swirled into the churchyard. The sound of hooves striking the ground was deafening, echoing off the wooden walls of the church. Clara, standing at the altar with Thomas, turned toward the noise, her heart instantly sensing danger. The sunlight caught her eyes, and in that instant she saw the figure she had hoped never to see again. Her body froze, a mix of fear and disbelief running through her. Thomas stepped slightly in front of her, his protective instincts kicking in. His eyes narrowed as he recognized the man approaching, Roderick Kane, the cattle baron who had once been so dangerously persistent in his pursuit of Clara. Before anyone could react, Roderick burst through the church doors, his voice booming through the sacred space. "She's mine," he shouted, the words cutting through the calm morning like a knife. The congregation gasped in shock, some clutching their chests, others covering their mouths in disbelief. Children cried out in fear, and the priest's hands shook as he tried to maintain some sense of order. The sound of Roderick's voice seemed to fill every corner of the church, leaving no room for doubt about his intentions. Every eye turned toward him, and the tension was palpable, as if the air itself had grown heavy with the weight of impending conflict. Thomas took a step forward, his jaw set with determination. "Stay back," he shouted, trying to protect Clara, his voice firm but strained with emotion. Friends and neighbors instinctively moved closer to form a barrier, their own fear mingling with courage. No one had ever witnessed Roderick acting so brazenly, so openly, and the sight of him storming into a place of worship sent a shiver down everyone's spine. Yet, despite their fear, no one could look away. There was something almost magnetic about the cattle baron's presence, the intensity in his eyes, and the sheer power with which he commanded the room. Roderick's gaze locked on Clara, and the world seemed to shrink around her. She felt her chest tighten, her heart racing uncontrollably. For a moment, she was paralyzed, unable to think beyond the danger that had suddenly exploded into her peaceful morning. She had known of Roderick's obsession in the past, had seen the lengths to which he could go when frustrated or angered, but seeing him now, so close, so relentless, was far worse than any story she had heard. His hand reached toward her, not with gentleness but with a force that demanded attention, an attempt to claim what he believed was rightfully his. The congregation reacted instantly, some trying to intervene, others frozen by fear. Thomas's friends stepped forward, forming a protective circle around the couple, but Roderick's sheer presence pushed against them like a storm. The sound of angry shouts and the pounding of hooves outside the doors created a chaotic symphony, merging with the cries of frightened children and murmurs of disbelief from the adults. It was a scene that would be remembered for decades, a moment when peace had been shattered in the blink of an eye, replaced by tension, danger, and uncertainty. Clara's mind raced as she tried to comprehend the situation. She glanced at Thomas, who gave her a reassuring nod, a silent message that he would protect her at any cost. But even with his presence, the sheer boldness of Roderick's actions left her unsure of what might happen next. The cattle baron's eyes were like fire, filled with obsession, and his voice carried a dangerous mixture of anger and longing. Every instinct in Clara's body told her to resist, to find a way to escape, yet she could feel the power behind Roderick's determination, a force that could overwhelm even the strongest of men. Suddenly, Roderick lunged forward, closing the distance between him and Clara in a heartbeat. The congregation shouted in alarm, some rushing to intervene, others stepping back to avoid becoming caught in the chaos. Thomas moved quickly, trying to block Roderick's path, but the cattle baron's momentum was relentless. The wooden floors of the church creaked under the weight of the sudden movement, and the stained glass windows seemed to tremble as the air filled with tension. In that instant, it was clear to everyone that the morning would never return to its calm state, that the wedding they had come to celebrate had become the stage for a dramatic confrontation unlike any the town had ever seen. Clara's fear surged, but so did her determination. She realized that she could not remain passive, that the situation demanded courage and quick thinking. As Roderick reached for her, she instinctively stepped back, pulling away from his grasp while keeping her eyes locked on Thomas. The protective circle of friends tried to hold Roderick at bay, but he was too powerful, too determined to be stopped by mere resistance. His obsession drove him forward, and the energy in the church seemed to vibrate with the intensity of the moment, the sense of danger almost tangible to every person present. The townsfolk watched in a mixture of horror and fascination, unable to look away as the drama unfolded before them. Mothers held their children tightly, men tightened their grips on whatever tools or weapons they could find, and the priest struggled to maintain control of the situation. The church, once a place of peace and celebration, had become a theater of tension and fear, a stage upon which human emotions collided with raw determination. And at the center of it all stood Clara, the object of Roderick's obsession, her heart pounding with fear, yet her spirit refusing to break under the pressure. Outside, the sound of hooves striking the earth grew louder as Roderick's horse pawed impatiently at the ground, sensing its master's agitation. The cattle baron's eyes flicked between the horse and Clara, a plan forming in his mind even as the crowd attempted to intervene. The tension reached a breaking point. The calm morning of celebration transformed into a storm of chaos, anticipation, and fear. Every breath felt heavy, every second stretched into eternity, and the town of Cedar Creek held its collective breath, waiting for the next dramatic turn in this extraordinary and unforgettable moment. And then, without warning, Roderick made his move, lunging toward Clara with the determination of a man who refused to be denied. The crowd gasped, the children cried, and Thomas sprang into action, ready to fight to protect the woman he loved. The church that had once echoed with joyful hymns now trembled with shouts, the pounding of hooves, and the sharp cries of fear. The calm morning had vanished, replaced by a pulse of raw energy and danger, and the story of Clara and Thomas's wedding was forever changed in that instant, setting the stage for a chase, a struggle, and a series of events that would be remembered in Cedar Creek for generations. To come, the moment Roderick Kane lunged forward, the church erupted into chaos. Clara's heart raced as she felt the powerful force of his determination pushing toward her. She clutched Thomas's hand tightly, her fingers trembling, yet she refused to let panic control her. The congregation shouted, some rushing to intervene, others frozen in disbelief. Chairs toppled, candles wavered, and the church bell outside rang faintly as if protesting the sudden violence invading the sacred space. Every eye was fixed on the dramatic scene unfolding at the altar, the tension so thick it seemed almost visible. Roderick's gaze never wavered from Clara. He did not care about the priest, the congregation, or even the sanctity of the church. All that mattered to him in that moment was claiming what he believed belonged to him. His strong hands reached for Clara, and though she resisted instinctively, he grabbed her arm with surprising strength. Thomas pushed forward to block him, but Roderick was ready, his movements swift and practiced. The two men collided in a struggle, a mix of raw strength and desperation, their boots scuffing against the wooden floor. Every second felt like an eternity as Clara tried to pull away, her heart pounding faster with every passing moment. Outside, Roderick's horse stamped impatiently, sensing its master's agitation. The massive animal was as much a part of his power as the man himself, a loyal companion trained to respond instantly. Roderick's plan formed quickly in his mind. If he could get Clara onto the horse, he could escape the crowded church and the pursuing townsfolk. Without hesitation, he reached toward the horse, steadying himself as he prepared for the next move. Clara's eyes widened in terror as she realized what he intended. She had heard stories of men who took what they wanted without thinking of anyone else, and now she was living that terrifying possibility. With one sudden motion, Roderick swung Clara toward the horse waiting just outside the church doors. The congregation gasped in unison, shock and fear mingling in every voice. Thomas lunged forward, but the sheer speed of the cattle baron and the weight of his momentum carried him, and Clara toward the horse before anyone could react. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she felt herself being lifted, the ground falling away beneath her feet. For a fleeting moment, she felt like she was suspended in midair, caught between fear and disbelief, unable to grasp what was happening so quickly. The horse reared slightly as Clara was placed onto its back, her hands clutching at Roderick's coat for balance. Roderick swung onto the saddle behind her, his arms securing her in place. The massive animal pawed the ground and then bolted forward, galloping through the churchyard and into the open streets of Cedar Creek. Dust and gravel flew in every direction, coating the townsfolk in a fine layer of grit. Shouts of alarm rang out as people scrambled to follow, some on foot, others grabbing horses from nearby stables. The peaceful wedding had transformed into a high-stakes pursuit, a chase that would carry the story far beyond the church walls and into the rolling plains beyond the town. Clara's heart pounded violently, her fear mingling with a strange surge of adrenaline. She had trusted Thomas to protect her, and now she clung to him with every fiber of her being. Yet, even as terror gripped her, she could sense the determination in Roderick's movements, the intensity that drove him forward. His hands were firm on her, not gentle but not cruel either. He was desperate, consumed by a belief that he could claim what he thought was his. The wind whipped past her face, carrying dust and the sound of galloping hooves, and for a moment Clara felt as if she were caught between two worlds, the safety of the life she had known and the peril of the unknown that stretched ahead. Thomas rode after them, his horse straining with effort as he pushed to close the distance. He shouted Clara's name, his voice carrying over the pounding of hooves and the chaos of the town streets. Several townsfolk joined him, mounting their own horses and forming a small but determined group in pursuit of the cattle baron. Their shouts and the pounding of their horses' hooves created a rhythm that seemed to echo the racing heartbeat of the young bride. Clara could hear Thomas calling her, and it gave her hope, even in the midst of terror. She knew he would not give up, that he would pursue her no matter the risk. Roderick did not slow. He guided the horse skillfully through the narrow streets of Cedar Creek, turning corners with precision, and using his knowledge of the town to maintain his lead. The townsfolk struggled to keep pace, the sudden chase turning the quiet morning into a whirlwind of dust, shouts, and pounding hooves. Children peeked from behind fences, wide-eyed with fear and fascination, while adults tried to keep themselves and their animals out of the path of the rushing riders. The church, once a place of celebration and joy, now lay behind them, its doors open, a silent witness to the dramatic turn of events. Clara's mind raced as she tried to think of a way to escape. She felt trapped, yet she refused to give up. She whispered urgently to Roderick, attempting to appeal to his reason, to remind him of the danger of his actions. "Please, Roderick, this isn't the way," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "You're scaring everyone, and this isn't love. You can't force someone to be yours." Her words seemed to strike a chord within him, if only briefly, but his obsession and pride drove him onward. His grip tightened slightly, and he urged the horse to run faster, determined to reach the open plains beyond the town where he could confront his own desires without interference. The chase carried them past familiar landmarks, the bakery with its fragrant bread, the blacksmith with sparks flying from his forge, and the schoolhouse where children were just beginning their morning lessons. The townsfolk, though alarmed, followed with courage, refusing to allow Roderick to escape with Clara. Thomas led the pursuit, his focus unwavering, his determination fueled by love and a sense of justice. Each turn of the horse's hooves brought them closer, yet Roderick's knowledge of the terrain gave him an advantage, and the distance between pursuers and pursued remained dangerously close. As they reached the edge of town, the streets gave way to open fields, and the wind whipped fiercely against Clara's face. The plains stretched out endlessly, golden grass waving in the sunlight, and the freedom of the open land made the chase both exhilarating and terrifying. Roderick urged the horse onward, pushing toward the horizon with relentless energy. Clara, though afraid, began to notice the cracks in his composure, the small moments when his confidence faltered. She realized that while he appeared powerful and unstoppable, he was driven as much by desperation as by strength. This knowledge gave her a flicker of hope. If she could remain calm and clever, she might find a way to influence the outcome. Thomas and the townsfolk pressed on, their determination unwavering. They shouted instructions, warnings, and encouragement, their voices blending with the natural sounds of the plains, the whistling wind, the pounding hooves, and the distant cries of startled animals. Every second brought the possibility of resolution, yet the tension remained high. Clara held on tightly, her mind racing to consider every option, every opportunity to escape, every chance to reason with Roderick before the situation escalated further. The chase had become more than just a struggle for control. It was a test of wits, endurance, and courage. Clara realized that her survival depended not only on Thomas and the townsfolk, but also on her ability to remain calm and think clearly. Each moment was critical, each decision had weight, and the outcome was uncertain. As the dust swirled around them and the horizon stretched endlessly ahead, she understood that the events of this morning would become a story told for generations, a story of bravery, obsession, and the power of love in the face of danger. And so, with the sun climbing higher in the sky and the wind carrying the sounds of galloping hooves across the plains, the chase continued. Clara clung to Roderick, her mind sharp despite the fear, while Thomas and the townsfolk pursued with unwavering resolve. The open field stretched before them, the horizon both a promise and a threat, and the fate of the young bride hung in a delicate balance, teetering between peril and hope. In that endless expanse, the story of Cedar Creek's wedding had transformed into a daring adventure, one that would test every character, reveal hidden strengths, and leave a lasting mark on the hearts of all involved. The wind howled across the open plains as Clara clung tightly to Roderick's back, her heart pounding as the horse galloped faster and faster. The dust rose in thick clouds behind them, swirling around their legs and stinging their eyes. Each moment was a blur of golden grass, distant hills, and the relentless rhythm of pounding hooves. Clara's mind raced as she tried to make sense of the dangerous situation she was caught in. Fear gripped her, but she refused to surrender to it. She knew she had to stay alert, to think clearly if she wanted to survive and perhaps influence Roderick before the pursuit escalated further. Roderick's grip was firm but not cruel. His obsession drove his actions, yet there was a flicker of vulnerability hidden beneath his intensity. Clara noticed this almost immediately. The man who had once seemed unstoppable now showed signs of uncertainty. His breathing was heavy, his eyes darting to the horizon, calculating, planning. He was strong, wealthy, and determined, but the chase had begun to wear on him. Clara realized that his pride and obsession were both his strength and his weakness. If she could appeal to his humanity, she might find a way to calm the situation before it spiraled into real violence. Her voice trembled at first, but she summoned courage, speaking softly but firmly. "Roderick," she called over the wind, "please listen to me. This isn't the way. You don't have to do this. You don't have to hurt anyone or yourself to prove anything." Her words cut through the rush of the wind, and for a moment, Roderick's horse faltered slightly, as if sensing the hesitation of its rider. His head turned slightly, his eyes meeting hers, and Clara saw a brief flash of conflict. She seized the opportunity to continue. "I know you care about me, but this isn't love. True love doesn't come from force or fear. It comes from choice and respect." For the first time, Roderick hesitated. His hands loosened slightly on her waist, and his face softened, the fire of obsession tempered by doubt. He had never been confronted like this before. All his life, he had been used to getting what he wanted through power, wealth, and intimidation. No one had ever spoken to him with such clarity, such calm determination. Clara's words were like a mirror, reflecting back the consequences of his actions and the danger of letting obsession rule his decisions. He felt a strange mix of anger, shame, and something he hadn't felt in years: uncertainty. Meanwhile, Thomas and the townsfolk pressed on with their pursuit, refusing to give up despite the distance Roderick had gained. Thomas's horse strained with each gallop, yet his focus never wavered. Every moment brought him closer to Clara, and every second was a test of endurance and courage. He called out her name again and again, his voice steady and filled with hope, letting her know that he was near, that she was not alone. The sound of Thomas's voice reached her over the wind and the pounding of hooves, and she clung to that hope, feeling a surge of determination. As they raced across the plains, Clara began to notice the signs of Roderick's exhaustion. His horse's breathing was heavy, its pace slightly uneven, and Roderick himself was beginning to show signs of strain. Clara realized that if she could remain calm and continue to appeal to his better instincts, she might create an opportunity to influence him without violence. She adjusted her posture carefully, leaning slightly forward to stabilize herself while keeping her voice clear and steady. "Roderick," she said again, softer this time, "you don't have to continue like this. You can stop. You can choose to walk away and keep your honor. There's a way to end this without anyone getting hurt." Roderick's eyes flicked toward her, the intensity in them softened by a storm of conflicting emotions. He had never expected Clara to speak to him with such courage and wisdom. In all his years, he had relied on intimidation, wealth, and power to get what he wanted. No one had ever challenged him this way. No one had ever made him pause and question his own choices. The words struck him like a quiet blow, more powerful than any physical confrontation could ever be. For a fleeting moment, he considered slowing down, reconsidering the path he had chosen in his obsession. Clara continued, sensing the moment was crucial. "You're strong, Roderick. You have everything people admire: power, wealth, skill. But strength isn't measured by force or control. It's measured by the choices we make, the way we treat others. You can prove your strength by letting me go and walking away with dignity." Her voice was calm, sincere, and unshakable. It was a voice that demanded attention, not through shouting or fear, but through the quiet power of reason and courage. The plain stretched endlessly around them, the wind whipping Clara's hair across her face, the dust clinging to her dress and skin. The horizon shimmered in the heat of the midday sun, a vast expanse that seemed to promise both freedom and uncertainty. Thomas's voice grew louder in the distance, calling out to Clara with unwavering determination. She could see the small figures of the townsfolk in pursuit, their resolve inspiring her even as exhaustion threatened to take hold. The chase had become a test of endurance for everyone involved, but Clara realized that the true challenge was not the physical distance, but the challenge of human hearts and minds, the struggle to influence Roderick's choices before the situation reached a breaking point. Roderick's pace slowed slightly, his horse responding to the subtle signals of its rider. Clara felt the shift immediately and leaned closer to speak again, her voice carrying over the wind. "Roderick, this isn't the way to honor yourself or me. You can choose to stop, to save yourself from regret. Let this end peacefully and you will be stronger for it." Her words had a surprising effect. Roderick's grip on her loosened further, his posture relaxing slightly. He had not realized that words, calm and reasoned, could have such a profound impact on him. For the first time, he felt the weight of his obsession not as power, but as a burden. Thomas was closing the distance steadily, his focus unwavering. He could see Clara on the horse, the tension in her posture, the determination in her eyes, and it fueled his own determination. He called out once more, his voice strong and clear, "Clara, hold on, I'm coming." The sound of his voice gave Clara a renewed sense of hope. She knew that escape or resolution was possible, that her words and Thomas's presence together could influence the outcome before anyone was hurt. As the hours passed across the plains, the pace of the chase slowed slightly. Roderick's horse showed signs of fatigue, and his own energy was waning. Clara continued to speak to him, appealing to his better nature, urging him to consider the consequences of his actions. She reminded him of the respect he could gain by choosing wisely, of the honor in letting go of obsession, and of the freedom that came from making a rational choice rather than succumbing to force. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, Roderick began to listen. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the tension reached a critical point. Roderick's horse slowed to a walk, his eyes meeting Clara's with a mixture of confusion, exhaustion, and something approaching understanding. Clara whispered softly, "You can stop now, Roderick. You don't have to continue this. You have a choice." He hesitated, the fire in his eyes dimming as he struggled with the realization of what he had done and what he might do if he continued. Clara's courage, combined with Thomas's steady pursuit, had created a turning point, an opportunity for resolution without violence, for understanding without harm. The wind continued to sweep across the plains, carrying the dust and the sounds of horses, but the tension in the air shifted. Roderick's pace slowed further, and Clara leaned slightly forward, speaking with gentleness and clarity. She saw the moment was coming when the cattle baron would have to decide: continue with obsession and risk everything, or choose reason and preserve his honor. The outcome hung delicately in the balance, a test of human nature, courage, and the power of words to transform even the most desperate situations. In that vast, open landscape, Clara realized the truth of the moment. Fear alone could not guide her actions. Courage, reason, and empathy were stronger. By appealing to Roderick's better nature, she had begun to influence him, planting seeds of reflection and restraint. She understood that the resolution would not be instantaneous, that patience, persistence, and clarity would be essential. Yet she also knew that the first cracks in his obsession had appeared, and that hope was no longer impossible. The plains stretched endlessly under the bright midday sun, golden waves of grass swaying in the wind. The air was thick with dust, the pounding of hooves echoing across the open fields. Roderick Kane, the cattle baron, had slowed his horse to a cautious walk, the fire in his eyes tempered by fatigue and the words of Clara that echoed in his mind. Her courage and clarity had begun to pierce the veil of his obsession, forcing him to confront the consequences of his actions. He could feel the weight of what he had done pressing on his shoulders, heavier with every step. The chase that had begun as a reckless display of force was now a tense negotiation of reason and human emotion. Clara clung tightly to Roderick, her arms steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She sensed the moment was critical, the instant when words, patience, and understanding could tip the balance between chaos and resolution. "Roderick," she said softly, "look at what this has caused. Look at the fear, the confusion, the danger. You don't have to continue. You can choose to stop. You can still leave with your dignity intact." Her voice was calm yet firm, carrying over the wind and the sounds of the horses, a lifeline of reason reaching the troubled man behind her. Roderick's horse slowed further, its powerful muscles straining against exhaustion. He raised his gaze to the horizon, considering Clara's words for the first time with genuine attention. He realized that his obsession, his desire to force what he believed was rightfully his, had brought danger not only to Clara but also to himself and the entire town. Pride had driven him this far, yet it had also blinded him to the consequences. The depth of his mistake began to weigh on him, and for the first time in years he felt a flicker of true reflection, a realization that he might have been wrong all along. Behind them, Thomas and the townsfolk continued their pursuit, but the distance was closing steadily. Thomas's voice rang out across the plains. "Clara, we're here, hold on." The sound of his voice was a comforting reminder to Clara that she was not alone, that love and support were close at hand. She met Thomas's eyes briefly and felt a surge of courage. Even as fear lingered, she knew that together, their determination and Roderick's growing hesitation could bring the situation to a peaceful end. Clara shifted slightly on the horse, leaning forward so that her words could reach Roderick more clearly. "You are not weak for stopping, Roderick," she said gently. "True strength is shown in the choices we make when we are tested. You have the power to end this without anyone being hurt. That is the kind of strength that people respect, the kind that lasts far longer than fear or force." Her tone carried conviction, a calm insistence that demanded consideration. The wind whipped around them, but her voice remained steady, a steadying influence on a man teetering between obsession and reason. Roderick's hands loosened slightly on her waist. He could feel the tension in his body begin to ebb, replaced by an unusual sense of clarity. His horse moved carefully now, no longer charging forward with reckless energy. He glanced back at the approaching figures, Thomas and the others, and saw not just pursuers but witnesses to his choices. The weight of their eyes and expectations, combined with Clara's words, created a moment of reckoning. For the first time, Roderick understood that he could not continue recklessly, that to persist would be to tarnish his honor and harm someone he had once admired. The plains around them seemed to hold their breath as Roderick's tension slowly transformed into contemplation. He tightened his grip briefly, then released it entirely, allowing Clara to sit more freely in the saddle. She remained alert, her eyes fixed on him, her words soft but insistent. "Roderick, it's time to stop. You can choose the right path now. Choose life without regret, choose honor, choose to leave here without harming anyone." Her presence, her calm bravery, and her understanding of his inner struggle were a mirror reflecting the man he could be if he acted wisely. Thomas closed the remaining distance quickly, his horse straining but determined. He shouted once more, calling Clara's name with a mixture of relief and urgency. The sight of him bolstered her courage, reminding her that she had allies and that the danger could be ended peacefully. As Thomas approached, the townsfolk behind him slowed their pursuit, sensing that the moment of confrontation was no longer about force but about choice. The chase had led to this critical point, the decision that would determine the outcome of the entire ordeal. Roderick finally came to a complete halt on a slight rise in the plains. He dismounted slowly, his horse pawing the ground gently as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Clara slid down carefully from the saddle, her hands steady on her lap, and faced him. She spoke again, softer this time, her eyes unwavering. "You have a choice, Roderick. Walk away now with your dignity, with your honor, and no one is hurt. That is strength. That is courage. That is the right path." The wind carried her words across the plains, blending with the distant shouts of the townsfolk and the heavy breaths of the exhausted horses. Roderick looked at Clara, then at the approaching figures of Thomas and the townsfolk. His pride warred with reason, his obsession warring with reflection. He realized that the path he had chosen through force and fear had brought him to the edge of ruin, and the woman he had once thought he could claim had shown him the power of courage, compassion, and reason. He inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. And then, slowly, he exhaled and lowered his hands. The fire in his eyes softened into a mixture of acceptance and humility. Clara stepped forward slightly, her posture calm, ready to respond to any sudden movement. But Roderick simply nodded, a quiet acknowledgement that he would no longer act out of obsession or force. He stepped back, allowing her space, and spoke quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of regret and realization. I understand," he said, his tone more subdued than anyone had ever heard it. "I have let my pride and obsession guide me for too long. I will leave. I will not bring harm." His words were a relief not only to Clara but to everyone present. The tension that had gripped the plains seemed to dissipate, replaced by a cautious sense of calm. Thomas quickly reached Clara's side, dismounting and embracing her with relief. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with concern and love. Clara nodded, her heart still racing but her spirit relieved. "Yes," she whispered, "thanks to you, and thanks to him realizing the right choice." The townsfolk gathered around, offering congratulations, comforting words, and shared relief. The ordeal was over, and the calm of the morning had been restored, though now tempered by the lessons learned from fear, courage, and reflection. Roderick mounted his horse once more, taking a final look at Clara and Thomas. His expression was one of quiet reflection. He spurred his horse forward, leaving the plains behind and heading back toward the distant hills, a man humbled by his own actions and the courage of others. Clara watched him go, understanding that he had been changed by the encounter, just as she and Thomas had been. The town of Cedar Creek would remember this day not just as a wedding, but as a story of obsession, courage, reflection, and the power of human choice. Later, the couple returned to the town, their spirits uplifted by the resolution. The townsfolk greeted them with cheers and applause, their fear transformed into admiration for the bravery and wisdom shown by Clara and Thomas. The wedding was rescheduled, this time without fear, and proceeded peacefully, a celebration of love, resilience, and the enduring strength of the human heart. Stories of the dramatic chase and Roderick's ultimate surrender were told for years, becoming legend in Cedar Creek, a tale not of violence, but of courage, reason, and the transformative power of compassion. Clara and Thomas finally stood together at the altar once more, surrounded by friends, family, and neighbors who had witnessed their love and bravery. Their hands were clasped, their eyes filled with tears of happiness and relief. The sun shone down upon them, a warm reminder of the beauty of life and the strength of human connection. Every smile, every tear, every whisper of congratulations carried the weight of the extraordinary events that had led them to this moment. The story of the plains, the chase, and the confrontation had ended, leaving behind lessons that would endure in the hearts of everyone present. And so, the wedding concluded not only as a celebration of love, but also as a testament to the courage, wisdom, and humanity of those involved. Clara and Thomas began their life together with a renewed understanding of love's power and the importance of reason, compassion, and courage in the face of danger. The town of Cedar Creek would never forget the day the cattle baron stormed the church, the daring chase across the plains, and the moment when courage and reason triumphed over obsession. It was a story that would be retold for generations, a true tale of love, bravery, and the strength of the human heart.